Happy Friday, everybody. Another weekly privacy chat. And wow, what a week this was between the European Court of Justice decision around pseudonymous data and the fact that we can still have international transfer flows. 3 FTC cases, Disney, a robot one taking data to China, and there was a third one as well. Oh, Pornhub. It has been a crazy swirl, but we will come back and talk about those another time. Right now, we're talking about a case that actually settled in July, but the full, I think, ramifications, given that it is not only the largest CCPA settlement, but one that starts giving us some interpretation around I don't know if it's unique to CCPA because it's starting to pop up in other states, but one that is first being enforced in this case around purpose limitation. And exactly what that means in the law was a big question, continues to be a big question, but the AG who brought this case and the decision start giving us some understanding of how purpose limitation and Adtech may not be great partners. So I'm joined by not only Jordan Wrigley on the FPF team, who works on health and wellness and age tech, all the good issues, interesting issues, hard issues, but also Andy Hepburn, the GC, and then Richy Privacy Buddha Glassberg of our friends at Safeguard Privacy. One of the reasons why I was eager to talk to Richy and Andy in particular is that people who maybe didn't grow up and live through Adtech and who look at this case say, well, come on, they were just dumb. They didn't do the right thing. They should have just, made sure the cookie banners worked well and why. And I think it takes a bit of an understanding of what this ecosystem looks like to understand how even flipping some switches and making your vendors behave well is challenging because of what it looks like. So I'm going to go to Richy, who started out in the early days of Adtech with me eons ago. Richy, I was just mentioning that I had read Ari Parparo, another old-time Adtech guy, whose recent book called something like Yield, How Google This and Google That, and it's in general about the competition case. But what he does an interesting job of is walking us through. Oh, there you got it. Awesome. I do recommend it for anybody who's interested in certainly the competition case, but interested in where and how Adtech got to where it is because of the business models, the competition, the chaos that exists in between the advertiser and the publisher. So, Richy, set us up a little. So, because I think we want people listening, many here who are in the compliance or legal world, right, who aren't just interested in the plane crash here, but are interested in what should I be doing? What could I be doing? And I think understanding the infrastructure of what's going on helps you start thinking about how you might get your arms around it. So quick, what is a Safeguard exactly? And give us, and then let's jump into the big picture.
So Safeguard Privacy is a company built by lawyers to write standardized assessments to all of these laws and allow companies to do two things: to manage your own compliance and manage your vendors' compliance. Fully auditable. We're used by most of the major holding companies, some of the biggest advertisers in the world. A couple of years ago, we were selected by the IAB to be the backbone and the white label support of the IAB diligence platform. And we kind of sit up here. We don't compete with any of the PET companies. That's not what we do. We're not on your tech. We're not a consent string or data guidance or any of that stuff. We're just legal compliance, fully auditable, and we're used in a ton of different ways. But we're not here to talk about us. But what we are here to talk about is advertising. And to try as quickly as I can, advertising is a major part of our economy. It's $1 trillion part of GDP. It is what makes commerce go. And advertising has always been about putting the right ad in front of the right people. And it used to be, you had a magazine, so it's certain audiences. You had broadcast television was broad. I grew up in cable television, niche networks. You wanted teens, you wanted sports, you wanted this. It's putting the right ad in front of the right person. Digital came around, Jules, you and I back in 95, some people in 94. And it really was the promise of one-to-one advertising, right? I want to put the right ad in front of the right person at the right time. You have to, I mean, it's obviously much more complicated than that, but you have to understand that's where this comes from. And that advertising has always been about either building the brand, you know, the aspirational brands. One day I'm going to want a Cadillac or a Mercedes or a Ferrari, right? Or hey, I'm sick and I need this, or your everyday brands. You know, this diaper is better for you. It has less leaks, or this thing is better for you, or this, that. So advertising is a wildly complex thing, but it's always been grounded on how do we get the right ad to the right person? Totally unregulated for 100 years. Now we've got the internet, and it started very simply. When we started CNN.com, we had to hard code an ad in. Then Jules, you and your little company DoubleClick said, hey, Richy, we can have an ad server. So then we got an ad server, so that another technology put it in. The last 15 years with programmatic, we now have an ecosystem, and I'm totally going over this quickly. We have an ecosystem that between advertiser A and consumer B on the publisher site you want to go to, major news site, major sports site, whatever, there could be 50 to 250 different companies, and some of the companies in that string may not know who the other companies are. And there are all kinds of things that happen. There's measurement, there's targeting, there's audience profiling, there's audience segmentation, and it is a very, very complex ecosystem that prior to these laws, prior to GDPR and to California, has been built over time, as you said, Jules, for profitability, for competition, for efficiency, for scale. And advertising has gone from a one-to-one marketplace where I'd go in and Andy and sell him an ad on certain thing if he was at a client or an agency, to an automated system that looks more like Wall Street than it does, you know, as a programmatic thing where it's all happening by computers. Is that what you wanted, Jules? Does that help?
Yeah, I think that the interesting takeaway from your description is I'm a good actor, I'm a publisher, and I want to do everything right. And I put up a cookie banner and I say, here's how you can opt out of the sale. I don't really think I sell data, but I have Adtech, and Adtech, because the data is being transferred on and maybe, again, used for a range of targeting, it's clearly a sale under California, a lot of states. So I say, here's how you do not sell. I cooperate with putting a global privacy control message, or I look for that and then trigger my no sale or my opt-out. And yet here we have this sort of train wreck in the Healthline case where because of the fact that there are, let's jump in. One key part of the failure here, the one that seems easy and again seems dumb if you don't understand the mess that exists under the hood in this big ecosystem, is that their cookie banner wasn't, and their GPC, their global privacy control, wasn't reliably and continually working. So do we just blame these third-party Adtech banner, the banner vendors who, you know, are selling a product that is supposed to work? Why is it always, I was just talking to a couple of leading, you know, very responsible brands, and they were all saying, oh, every time we run some sort of assessment and we check, something else isn't working. It's breaking. It's not doing this. It's not doing that. What is it about this giant chain of humble jumble that exists in between the publisher and the advertiser that continues to just create an impossibility of that banner doing what we want it to do? Block the cookies when users have said, block the cookies.
Very quick point. I think Omar Tanay, in one of the papers he wrote about this and published recently, I like his comment that the AG's office has moved beyond paper compliance. And I think people, don't understand the amount of technical tools out there to be able to manage this. And performative compliance, paper compliance is gone. You have to do real compliance. It is so complicated, Jules. I think you could run any one of their 10 or 12 sniffers. You could run them all. You could run them this week. You could run them next week. Something's still going to break because there could be 150 companies between when the advertiser buys that ad and it shows up on that website. That's a problem, Jules.
And I've been working with a big publisher who describes that challenge as playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
You're just constantly finding new tags, pixels, things that are firing. You don't know who they are. Where did they come from? How did they get in here? So it's an ongoing, persistent challenge for everybody in the.
Yeah. So I guess it's critical to realize that it's not like there's this simple situation where somebody is talking to an advertiser and putting on their tag. You're using an ad server which is interacting with other ad servers that might be managed and run by exchanges and agencies and other parties that are maybe doing measuring. Many of those parties can update what they're doing without updating the tag on your site. So I think I took care of everything, and I named maybe even all the downstream parties and so forth. But all of a sudden, because of an agency buy or because of a new partner somewhere in the stream, there's a new player in the mix. Now, the industry groups have tried to deal with this by setting collective rules. I know many of the IAB companies use your assessments, and many of those companies have signed on to different agreements that they always, whenever they see a certain signal, they'll always treat it this way and that way. So there's been a lot of, and in this case in particular, Healthline sought to rely on that by working with vendors who were part of these different self-regulatory sort of industry standard schemes, except some of their partners they thought were, but were not. So that's perhaps some of that performative compliance.
There's two important points to what you just said. One is, in that complexity, your first half of your statement, you could be relying on the bid stream and what's happening on the bid stream. You may not know that you said there's ad servers on both sides. There's a DSP, there's an SSP, there's header bidding, there's waterfalls. You may not know that one of those people is putting a pixel on there. I'm not talking measurement. Maybe it's somebody that doesn't trust the cookie that you're sharing, so they've got their own pixel there to collect it. But the consumer can't see that because it's 5 levels deep. I don't know how you're going to get notice at collection if a DSP or an SSP puts their own pixel there. That I find very troubling. Healthline had not used us. I do believe it was public that they were part of the MSPA, but I do believe it was also written by the IB that they didn't. And they had a CMP and they had a cookie banner, but they didn't configure it right, or they didn't listen to the signals or agree to do the things they agreed to do. That's what everybody's written about that. So
I think it is a key takeaway, I think, for everyone that, now we can get Sephora with DPC, we had Honda with, they're all coming with, they have consent management functionality on their website. But one of the key takeaways needs to be, it's not plug and play. You have to configure it to work with your system so that when a consumer opts out, the signals start going downstream in the ecosystem.
Our friend Alex Cohn, who knows a little bit about Adtech, reminds us that even outside the bid stream, the sort of normal exchange of the ad server making a request and going, to an exchange or so forth to offer the ad space for a bid, simply when an ad lands on a page, the ad creative itself might be invoking various third parties, and you may or may not be aware of them. Your consent management tool may or may not be expecting to handle those. You may not have a contract with them, right? Again, it's very easy to look at Healthline and say, well, you just had some paper and that's not enough. And I think we get the point. But the reason this ends up being hard is it's not like there's a paper signed agreement between every party who walks into your environment. Now, look, that is what it is, right? We can't defend, hey, we have a system. I mean, if I owned a store and I had vendors, like say Macy's and different vendors, have portions of my store, and in the Chanel corner, or I don't know, whatever corner, somebody starts beating up the people who walk by, and I say, well, I don't know who shows up here. People show up. It's like a flea market, right? Like, no, we'd say, yo, Macy's, you're in charge of your environment.
But Jules, notice that collection for third parties in the Adtech space is notoriously difficult to do. I mean, it is so layered and deep. But here's my question for you, Jules. Is the heart of this debate the fact that I think targeted advertising is the backbone of the advertising industry. It's been since there was print, right? But the AG in this case is calling it a secondary use. If it is, do you really need consent for targeted advertising? But that's not logical if we're in an opt-out system. They've opted out. So if I go to Healthline and I look up an article, am I stupid or do I have this disease? I expect to get an ad in that disease from a solution of that disease, a drug. That doesn't surprise me. Is the issue here, because I think that's targeted advertising, not contextual. I will argue that all day. Alex Cohen, I'm happy to talk to you about that. Or is it the fact that Healthline then I looked at the article, am I stupid or do I have this disease? They sold it to a data broker. And the next time I go to the sports site to look at my Premier League scores, you can see my banners behind me, I get an ad for that disease. I'm like, well, wait, how does that site know I have that disease?
Yeah. So look, let's step back a second, right? Jordan spends a lot of time focused on many of the states that have an express opt-in for health data. And California, we like to criticize, is not one of those states that has, like Washington and others, an express opt-in for health data. But surprise, surprise, this purpose limitation section, which I think many worried or hoped, depending on where you sit in this debate, might go as far as what you were just suggesting. Adtech doesn't work. I don't think they went that far. I think what they did is the narrowest piece here. They didn't say Healthline, no ads for you or no targeted ads for you. They allow it as long as you can properly do all the notices and the opt-outs and so forth. But they said if you're reading an article that indicates you were diagnosed. Now, I will note that the various trade groups and NAI and so forth already have said, saying that somebody has been diagnosed, whether you know that because of HIPAA data at the hospital or a form, or I guess this is sort of for the first time, you read an article that indicates, hey, this article is for people with this disease. But Jordan, I wonder whether this distinction is really logical. I mean, I pull up Healthline, I'm reading whatever is there, or I Googled something, or ChatGPT'd it, and I end up on a page, and it might be information because I'm researching about a friend, a cousin. I read about it in the news. RFK won't give me vaccines for that disease anymore, blah, blah, blah. It seems like the focus was the nature of, is it reasonable for a publisher to be reading, these articles? Maybe they're not going to label, the same article is going to be there, but the headline will no longer be, hey, you with the diagnosis, read this. It'll be important information about this disease. So how do you buy, is California sort of trying to correct the deficiency in its law because everyone else is starting to do an opt-in for sensitive health data? Is this distinction between what sort of article now we don't even know what the third parties who were capturing this were creating a profile. Maybe they were just creating a generic, because again, a lot of the industry standards do not allow a sensitive health profile. They might just be calling it health and wellness or interested in, medical information. We don't know what and how the data was even being used downstream. So what's your take on the way this line was sort of drawn based on the title, or as opposed to, did someone create a profile and then target these people? Hey, you have this disease. We're targeting you for this disease. We don't know.
This is a really interesting question, Jules, and one I think about constantly in the middle of the night when I really should be sleeping. I'll make sure to look up a Healthline article about that. I think this distinction is really interesting, and really California is getting very technical here in a lot of ways and reaching into this field that's been around for a while called health information seeking behavior. So it's an interesting hypothesis, but one of the things in the complaint that didn't really come out for me is I need you to get in here and actually measure the hypothesis between these two. So to kind of say the proof is in the pudding here, I would be really curious to know if they took, now it's worth noting here that this was a highly technical investigation, and there were several aspects of it that included what you're now seeing in a lot of attorney general's offices, which is technologists coming in to do the investigations. And within that, it's not just about computer science, it's also about things like information science, UX design, understanding how the consumer interacts with that information, thus health information seeking behavior is a profession. But distinguishing between these two, if I were to put on my regulator technologist hat, I would be really curious to know, is there a difference, to your point in this profiling, how people who visit, individuals who visit each of these different articles, how that data is treated? Are they advertised to differently? Are there more trackers on one page versus the other? And how do we understand that? What does that mean? That doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It could even be good. Those trackers could be being used and that information could be being used to get really useful treatments in front of people or connected to things that would benefit them. But is that then, for the purposes of purpose limitation, in keeping with consumer expectations to be treated either differently based on the articles they visit or the same based on the articles they visit? It's a really interesting question. I do feel like it could have been a little bit better fleshed out with a little bit more evidence and technical work behind it. But I imagine a few years from now, we'll start seeing very real questions asked this, where you can get really into the nitty gritty and try to understand what's actually happening to that data. But to your and Ricky's point and Andy's point, the complexity of the advertising systems out there will make it very difficult. So I imagine we'll continue to see more and more technical professionals joining the field.
Andy, let me ask you to put your legal hat on here as the GC there. The notion, again, for those of us who've been dealing with Adtech for 20 or 30 years, my reasonable expectation is like when I go to a website, my data is going to go everywhere, right? But clearly 20 or 30 years in, that seems to not be the reasonable expectation, perhaps, of a lot of people who don't understand what's going on. So do we simply need publishers to start making it clear, especially free ad-supported publishers? I think Healthline is free, such that the purpose of their site is advertising and content, and I know people don't want to say things like that, but you know what? They didn't want to say, do not resell your data, do not tell me not to sell the data, and everyone bit the bullet because they had to do so. So maybe it's just time for the ad-supported publisher model to step up and say, we are an ad-supported publisher, say it somewhere big enough, but on the bottom. And when you visit our page, you will get other relevant ads here and even elsewhere based on what you've done here, because we want to reach you and hopefully you'll be more interested in those ads and so on and so forth. Right? I mean, will that get me out of this purpose limitation box?
I mean, ideally it would, but I don't, for me, that one of the things that I've been part of the debate with the whole, not the debate, dialogue with the Adtech ecosystem about what these laws are trying to achieve. But I think you almost have to go all the way back to the start with, the impetus behind CCPA. It was targeted advertising. The thing came out of one man who had a real negative reaction to targeted advertising. And you start seeing this progression with CCPA, and then CPRA says, oh, well, sharing personal information for targeted advertising also requires knowledge. That was one of the primary. So the answer is yes, but will it be enough? And so part of the answer, Jules, I think, is we got to come to, the industry has got to find a way to come to an understanding with the state and the regulators about what the boundaries are. Are you saying that, is it your goal that we don't do targeted advertising? If that's the goal, you've just really impacted a large segment of the, so if that's not your goal, then what are the boundaries and how do we comply? Because here, if a reasonable reading of Healthline is change the way that you create your headlines so they don't create inference of health conditions, right? That's not a reasonable approach. I mean, so we don't create, you can't share the headlines that say, if you just get diagnosed with diabetes, well, then we've got an inference that you have diabetes, even if it's my mom, right, that has diabetes.
Yeah.
So
Look,
it's not.
Here's what I think the regulators would say, right? Which is, we are not against advertising. They would even say, we are not against targeted advertising, except for kids, maybe teens. They would say, but sensitive data that can be used to embarrass you or harm you or so on and so forth, either you shall not use at all, like here, because you've got a diagnosis, or even if it's not as sensitive, it's simply you're reading about sensitive things and I'm labeling you in that manner, then in a bunch of states, you better opt in, Washington and others. And then in a bunch of others, California, you better let people opt out and manage to watch the signals of others who have opted out. And it damn well better work. And you got to have everybody on the contractual control that they're going to cooperate with all of the rules and the system. And then you better be doing something to make sure that whatever cooperation you have on paper is actually technically happening by auditing or managing those partners or auditing or managing. Now, the bright side is they did indicate that they do appreciate and care about the various self-regulatory pieces, the IAB, the NAI. It does appear, they said, well, those are good, except you didn't make sure everybody was contractually on the hook for that, and you didn't make sure it was all working. But the good news is that the system that has been put together in the background to try to facilitate the cooperation, which a lot of advocates and critics and others were dismissing, and even others in the industry who maybe, didn't fit them perfectly. I do think that was a positive shot in the arm. Cooperating with the GPC is also a bit of a safe harbor. It just, again, wasn't working well. So I think there is a path, but it shows, I think, that the compliance is a bigger, heavier burden. So if you're in the sensitive business, you're under a lot of pressure. Teens, health. Now, Jordan, a lot of the people in the health, what about all the health people? So Healthline, obviously commercial, they ought to know what they're doing. But a lot of the states capture not-for-profits, hospitals, a whole range of actors, religious organizations who seem to have no clue. I mean, Richy, how many of don't give me the exact, business details, but I'm going to guess that 100% or 99% of your clients that are doing, assessments and using your tools to at least walk through the states properly are commercial enterprises, and the not-for-profits are waiting and, they're going to be shocked that they're subject to all these rules.
So I don't want to jump on Jordan. So Jordan, go ahead, and then I'll jump in.
Thank you, Ricky. I appreciate it. I can keep this short and go back to Ricky for the technical stuff, but I do think that you're bringing up a really good point, Jules, which is those spaces that we have normally thought of as HIPAA spaces, and HIPAA is very familiar and has even set what I would call a floor in consumer minds to even think that sites like Healthline may be HIPAA covered, which helps them, unfortunately, supports the misunderstandings that can create actions like these, unfortunately. But there are other guidances to look to. For example, the American Medical Association has some pretty specific guidance about how to manage data that is not HIPAA covered, that is around things like health information seeking and advertising and tracking. And it's definitely worth going to those and kind of seeing what we can work out and possibly even discussing, is this something we can stick to? So, Ricky, I'll hand it back to you.
So Richard, before you answer, could you answer, one of our listeners says, well, but billboard advertising has no hyper-targeting, so why do we need it here?
That's not true. Your cell phone can get picked up on a lot of billboard advertising, and they can give you an ad. You don't even know it.
Okay.
But that's
when that's not there, like, why can't the banner ad just be like a billboard and nothing more?
Okay. None of this is working well. The industry has got to do a better job of working together. The creepy factor in advertising has been around from the beginning. I go to the largest place out there. I buy the same pair of Merrell shoes. I put them in the basket. I buy it. And then for the next 30 days, I get ads from Merrell shoes everywhere. Our system is broken, and it's always been broken. Just annoyed people because somebody put a pixel on it and somebody else got a pixel and it got sold to somebody else and it for 30 days until the cookie died. It got different when that same pixel, the exact same technology for my Merrell sneakers that I wear it every 3 years and go back to that same big commerce site to do, is I went and searched for, you name it, depression, prostate, whatever, anything that a man of my age may look at. And then I'm tracked with that around the world. Bad eyesight. I wear glasses on the computer now. Jules, that same technology, what people don't understand is the AI and the algorithm doesn't understand the difference between Merrell shoes and a man of my age who needs glasses and is dealing with, myopia or whatever the heck I'm dealing with. The algorithm is stupid. It wasn't built that way, Jules. It doesn't work that way. So the industry, part of the problem is all the intermediary Adtech people want to use the data for purposes different from what they collect from the publisher, right? So if they all wanted to be a service provider, that'd be great. It would solve a lot of the problems. The problem is that would destroy huge business models that are out there in the industry today, and it would collapse. And, it's a nuanced thing, Jules. You don't get to get the news for free or the sports scores for free. There is no free lunch. Somebody is paying for it. If you are not paying for it, you are the product. You have to pay for this. But the three of you have all said, look, there is tech out there. Look, the IAB has done a great job with the GPC and the strings. They're doing a great job with the MSPA. I don't know, I'm going to get the number wrong. There's over 1,400 companies on that, right?
MSPA, folks, by the way, that the multi-state agreement where everybody's
bringing contracts, so that it solves the problem of, I don't have a contract with Jordan. I bought the ad from Andy, but Jordan's on there. If the three of us are on the MSPA, it springs into life. Michael Hahn will be mad at me. I think I did that right. But the truth is,
so if you're listening and you're not ensuring that your vendors are in the MSPA, please read a bit more. That was one of the problems here in Healthline. The fact that you don't have a contract with all sorts of magical third parties that show up.
In Honda, and that happened in Gravy, and that happened in a lot of other things, right?
So the IAB purports to solve it by everyone who signs their name on the register saying, I agree that if I'm in business with you, I'm going to agree with those terms.
Right. So the other problem is that our industry has been largely unregulated for the last 100 years. I'm not talking about kids. I'm talking about it in general. We are now a heavily regulated industry. So when a pharma company who is heavily regulated or a major bank who is heavily regulated, they understand compliance. Standards equal scale. Everybody writing their own contract or everybody writing their own assessment doesn't help the industry. So, we have developed, the GPC, the strings in Europe. We've developed this stuff. We have the IAB now has a standardized assessment. You do it once, you can share it with everybody in the industry. Everybody's got to get on this stuff. Everybody should get on the MSPA. Everybody should be doing the standards as a minimum, following the GPC strings, following the code, and making sure that you implemented it. Again, I go back to Omar called it. You can't do paper compliance anymore. I think Omar today said it exactly right. You have to put this stuff in place. You have to check it. Like, here's a great example that I think Stacy Sesser said on stage at the California privacy event in the spring. I think it was Stacy. If your checkout cart wasn't working, don't you think there'd be 50 engineers on it within 5 minutes if I couldn't put my basket in the cart? Why don't you treat your opt-out the same way you treat your cart? And I think she's right. I think that we are not taking it seriously. And then if we were, we'd be all over our PE tools. There's a ton of PE tools out there. They are as good or bad as how you implement it and how you stay on top of it and make sure that it's working. And again, I go back to, if your shopping cart is broken, it's all hands on deck. The whole company stops and fixes. Why isn't the same thing with consent and how you're treating your consumers?
All right, let's do a lightning round of some final takeaways, and then I will wrap us up. Let's start with Jordan, Andy, Richy, and then we will let people go about their day. Jordan, what didn't we bring out that you think people watching and reading this, whether it's tied to the Healthline case or your broader FPF work around sensitive data generally, what should we be aware of?
I think the key thing for me, and this is trending a little bit, is to keep an eye on which AG offices are hiring technologists or will have more technical staff around, and what companies are going to do to match that. Because if there are technologists out there who are going to be watching, surveilling, looking at, trialing, testing all of your opt-outs, all of your technical tools, all of your websites, and looking at different aspects, companies probably need to have someone who is similar and can do the same on their side. So we need to be thinking about staffing, we need to be thinking about interdisciplinarity, and we need to be thinking about what that looks like and how that could run effectively.
Andy.
Yeah, I think my takeaway is that, you know, Healthline was trying, and they were putting the pieces in place. They were on some part of the journey to privacy compliance. The takeaway is that it's hard. You can't, you know, a CMP, a consent management platform, is not a plug and play tool. You have to configure it with your system. You know, the MSPA is not a silver bullet. The IAB, you know, industry agreement, because not everybody's part of it. So if you've got vendors or recipients of your personal information that are not signed up, you've got to do something else. That makes it really hard. And so it's a challenging thing. So to me, the takeaway is the industry needs to coalesce around standards that help everybody comply, because it's a hugely complex ecosystem. And without standards, it's going to be a challenge to ever get there.
Richy.
I think this industry over the last 15 to 20 years has been built and architected in a way that is not compatible with the laws that have been written. And I'm very concerned that I don't know how we're going to solve that. I'm very concerned about the explicit language in the line says, at the point of collection, are you getting the notice and consent from the consumer? And I think there's a lot of people in the ecosystem that are, you could technically say at the notice of collection, there's no way they can contact the consumer to get that consent. And I don't know how to fix that. And I don't know if it's not in the middle, it's at the edges, the advertiser, the ad itself, or the publisher, where you have to have a much broader consent, where you say, look, this is what's happening. Kind of what you said earlier, Jules, we're doing advertising, we're doing this, it's got to be this. And I'm really worried about that. And the conflict with the actual business cases of massive public companies and the way they've been built. That worries me.
Final words, a reminder that California is working on legislation that the CCPA agency has been advancing to mandate that the browsers also pass a signal. That maybe makes it easier, but maybe makes it harder, because it now adds another signal to an environment where there's a lot going on.
But Jules, the one point on that is if they make browser data, all of it sensitive data, it wipes out all of advertising. Because that would be a death knell, right? Because it's just too broad.
Two other key points from the case. When somebody has opted out, your partners are not deleting and throwing out all the data necessarily, but they're potentially now restricted to act as service providers, where they can do some of the basics. They just can't sell or make use of the data in their own. And one problem in the Healthline case was not making sure that the data in the hands of the third parties, after a user did exercise and opt out, knew that they were now obligated by contract to simply be a service provider, maybe delivering and returning an ad, but not selling data further and not making any profiling or the use of the data on their own. Key point, I think that.
So Jules, not to get biblical, but the regulators have just made you your brother's keeper.
Oh,
100%.
That is perhaps the problem that you've been identifying for us, which is that if you are the person with the relationship to the consumer,
yes,
you are the keeper of your customer.
I agree.
And we have a system that has been built into much more of a swamp and a stew and a kaleidoscope. And legally, everyone is indeed obligated to be their customer's keeper. And that's the clash. Okay. The last point is the focus in this case as well is identifying the person responsible for contract review. Regulators are getting much more focused, not the company's going to do it, who was assigned the responsibility. So that whole notion of moving towards individual accountability, Minnesota's new consumer privacy law requires that businesses designate an individual to oversee privacy compliance. So yay for all of us who need privacy compliance jobs, but you see the accountability moving very clearly to specific people, which creates additional risk, but maybe is a solution to the accountability.
Jules, do you remember when Sarbanes-Oxley came out and everybody in the company had to sign the piece of paper? We're back in that world. I remember at the massive media company I was at when all of a sudden they're like, you got to sign this. I'm like, gulp. I actually think that's a positive thing, Jules.
To Richie's point, one of our commentators notes, fixing the checkout systems is actually hard too. This challenge is parallel to the recent TCPA one-to-one standard that got tanked. Companies figured out a way to make it happen. All right, we've gone 40 minutes. You all have work, or maybe you should take off one last Friday. It's still sort of the end of the summer. Richy, let me ask you to post a link to a recent resource that you guys produced. It's sort of a privacy program in a box, or a privacy program for a new privacy organization. Really, really nicely done. I think whether you're new or whether you've got a program and you want something to sort of gut check that you've got all the things that experts say ought to be in your program, let's drop a link because I think it's a really useful resource that you produced for the community. So thank you, for many years of both friendship and support at FPF, and to the broader privacy community. Jordan, Andy, thank you guys. Have a great week now.
Thank you.
Bye now.